Have you ever imagined what would happen if your family's legacy was put to the ultimate test? Miss Charlotte, one of the wealthiest women in the country, knew her children well and feared how greed could tear them apart after her death. So she devised a unique plan that would leave her children shocked and struggling to meet her final wishes. As they gathered in the grand mansion for the reading of her will, they expected a straightforward division of wealth, but what they received was far from ordinary. Miss Charlotte had crafted a set of challenges that would not only test their abilities but reveal their true characters. What began as a promising opportunity for wealth quickly turned into a dark and suspenseful trial that threatened to tear the siblings apart. Just when the tension reached its peak, an unexpected twist brought a surprising end that no one saw coming. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Miss Charlotte, renowned for her immense wealth and status, was haunted by an unspoken fear as the shadow of death loomed closer. She had spent her life amassing a fortune that many could only dream of, yet it was the future behavior of her children that weighed heavily on her heart. Her thoughts often wandered to the inevitable moment when her will would be read, and she couldn't shake the dread of their reactions. Would they be consumed by greed, driven by selfish desires to tear apart the legacy she had carefully built? Determined to protect her values even in death, she devised a cunning plan, one that would test the true nature of her offspring. As the final chapter of Miss Charlotte's life closed, her passing sent a ripple of anxiety through her family. Her children, each grappling with their own turbulent emotions, gathered in her grand estate, their minds racing with thoughts of the inheritance that awaited them. They had no inkling of the surprise their mother had meticulously prepared, a revelation that would forever alter their perceptions. Miss Charlotte, ever the strategist, had outmaneuvered them with one last act of wisdom and foresight, ensuring that the division of her estate would be guided not by greed, but by the principles she held dear. In the end, Miss Charlotte's children would come to realize that their mother's true wealth was not in the riches she left behind, but in the lessons she imparted, a final, profound gift that would challenge their hearts and souls, forcing them to confront the deeper meaning of family, legacy, and the values that truly matter. "My deepest condolences for your loss," Mr. Evans said solemnly, his voice heavy with genuine sorrow. Miss Charlotte was a remarkable woman, and I share in your grief for her passing. The three children exchanged glances, their faces betraying a mixture of emotions, but they remained silent, each wrestling with their thoughts as the lawyer's words hung in the air. Richard, never one to mince words, broke the silence with a sharp edge to his tone. "Let's cut to the chase, Mr. Evans," he said, his impatience barely concealed. "What does the will say? How much money are we dealing with here?" Mr. Evans, unfazed by Richard's abruptness, adjusted his glasses with deliberate calm and exhaled slowly. "Miss Charlotte left explicit instructions regarding the distribution of her estate," he replied, his voice measured. "I suggest you all take a seat. There's much to discuss." The somber atmosphere in the room deepened as the three siblings, now seated around the grand mahogany table, prepared to hear the final wishes of their late mother. The lawyer, holding the worn leather folder as if it were a sacred relic, paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle in. The weight of the years he had spent serving Miss Charlotte was evident in his eyes, and his every movement reflected the seriousness of the task before him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Evans began, his voice low and steady, "we are gathered here today to read the last will of Miss Charlotte." He carefully scanned the faces of the three heirs, gauging their reactions as a profound silence filled the room. The anticipation was palpable, each sibling wrestling with their expectations and fears. As Mr. Evans opened the folder with deliberate precision, the rustle of paper seemed to echo through the stillness, amplifying the tension that had settled over the room like a shroud. The lawyer's words carried the weight of finality, each sentence a carefully crafted key to unlock the future that Miss Charlotte had so meticulously planned. As he began to read, The air in the room thickened with emotion, an invisible thread binding the siblings together, even as it threatened to unravel the fragile ties that had held them as a family. The true contents of the will, however, remained a mystery, waiting to be revealed with the same deliberate care that Miss Charlotte had shown in life. Richard, unable to contain his impatience, coughed nervously before breaking the heavy silence. "Well, let's not drag this out any longer. How much does each of us get?" His voice carried an unsettling blend of authority and barely concealed anxiety, as if the very answer he sought might unsettle him. Mr. Evans, ever composed, raised a hand to silence Richard, his gaze firm and unyielding. "It's not that simple, Mr. Richard. Your mother's will isn't just about dividing assets. There are special conditions." Susan, always the astute observer, exchanged a knowing glance with Laura, whose calm demeanor starkly contrasted with Richard's agitation. Sensing the underlying tension, Susan turned back to the lawyer, her mind already racing through possible interpretations. "What do you mean by special conditions, Mr. Evans?" she asked, her voice laced with the precision of someone accustomed to navigating legal complexities. The lawyer took a measured breath, adjusting his glasses with deliberate care. Miss Charlotte had a unique vision for how her fortune should be allocated beyond the material wealth. She was deeply concerned with the legacy each of you would leave behind. Her instructions are clear, but they require more than just a signature on a dotted line. They demand character, integrity, and a demonstration of your true values. Everything will be explained in due course. With a steady hand, he flipped through the pages of the will. "Are you prepared to hear your mother's final wish?" The siblings exchanged puzzled glances, uncertainty settling in like a fog. Laura, always the voice of reason, spoke first. "Yes, Mr. Evans, we are ready." The lawyer nodded solemnly, then began to read the words that Miss Charlotte had penned with great care. "My dear children, if you are reading this, it means I have departed from this world. I am aware that you may have anticipated a straightforward division of my estate, but there is one final wish that must be honored." Richard, unable to curb his impulsiveness, interrupted with frustration. "What is she talking about?" Mr. Evans shot him a stern look, his voice firm. "If you allow me to continue, Mr. Richard, everything will be revealed." Susan placed a gentle hand on Richard's arm, her tone both calming and insistent. "Let him finish. Richard, we owe it to Mother to listen to her wishes. She always had a purpose behind everything she did." Though tension lingered in the air, the siblings settled into a tense silence. Their curiosity piqued. Mr. Evans cleared his throat and resumed reading. "My fortune will not be simply divided among you. Instead, you will face two challenges I have designed. Only those who approach these challenges with honesty, integrity, and the spirit of unity will be deemed worthy of inheriting my estate." The room fell into a deeper silence as the weight of Miss Charlotte's words sank in. Richard's earlier bravado faded into quiet contemplation, while Susan and Laura exchanged uncertain glances, each of them trying to grasp the full meaning behind their mother's final test. Miss Charlotte, even in death, had found a way to ensure that her children would be measured not by their greed, but by their capacity to grow, to change, and to embody the values she had cherished most. After the shocking revelation of the will, a heavy, stunned silence filled the room. As if the very air had thickened with the weight of Miss Charlotte's final words, it was Susan who finally mustered the courage to break the tension. The three siblings exchanged bewildered glances, each trying to process the unexpected twist. Richard, ever the impatient one, couldn't hold back any longer. "Challenges? What kind of nonsense is this? Mother always had a knack for making things difficult." Susan's voice trembled slightly as she voiced the question that was on all their minds. "What does she mean by challenges? Surely she can't be serious, can she, Mr. Evans?" Laura, usually the quiet observer, raised a thoughtful eyebrow, her mind already working to make sense of it all. "This is highly unusual. Did Mother ever mention anything like this before?" The lawyer nodded gravely. His expression somber. Your mother's instructions were indeed clear and binding. She has set 2 specific challenges to determine who among you will inherit her fortune. Richard, his patience finally snapping, slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with frustration. This is utterly ridiculous. I want my share now, not after some absurd contest. Richard, calm yourself, Mr. Evans said firmly, his voice cutting through the rising tension. If you wish to claim the inheritance, you must respect and comply with your mother's wishes. Richard glared at the lawyer, his anger barely contained. This is absurd. Mother always had her eccentricities, but this is going too far. Laura, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, stared down at her fingers, absorbing the full impact of her mother's demands. She had always known that Miss Charlotte had high expectations for them, but this surpassed anything she could have anticipated. The challenges weren't just about money, they were about proving themselves worthy in ways that mattered deeply to their mother. I didn't see this coming, Susan admitted, her gaze shifting from her siblings to the lawyer, her expression a mixture of uncertainty and determination. But if this is what Mother wanted, then we have to take it seriously. Mr. Evans nodded in agreement. You have time to consider your options and decide how you wish to proceed. I will provide you with the details of the challenges and the deadlines. Please understand, these are Miss Charlotte's final wishes, and they must be honored. The silence that followed was thick with realization. It was no longer just a moment of shock. It was the dawning understanding that their lives were about to change in ways they had never imagined. The fate of their inheritance would not be decided by wealth alone, but by the trials they would face, trials that would not only test their skills but also reveal the true nature of their character. Each of them now knew that Miss Charlotte's final challenge was more than a mere obstacle. It was a journey that would either bring them together or tear them apart. Laura, who was typically the calmest among the siblings, couldn't hide the mix of confusion and concern that clouded her face as she turned to the lawyer. What exactly are these challenges, Mr. Evans? Mr. Evans, sensing the gravity of the moment, cleared his throat before he spoke. The first challenge will take place in a pitch-dark room inside. You will find 3 identical boxes. One of these boxes holds a key, another conceals a poisonous scorpion, and the third contains a venomous snake. A cold shiver ran down Laura's spine as she absorbed the lawyer's chilling words. Richard and Susan exchanged alarmed glances, the seriousness of the situation finally dawning on them. Each of you must select and open one of these boxes, Mr. Evans continued, his voice steady but grave. The person who finds the key will advance to the second challenge. Richard, true to his impulsive nature, cut in angrily. This is absolute madness. Mother must have been out of her mind before she passed. Susan, ever the voice of reason, looked at the lawyer, her expression a mix of apprehension and determination. Mr. Evans, this is incredibly dangerous. We can't just agree to something like this without fully understanding the risks involved. The lawyer nodded, his demeanor sympathetic. I understand your concerns, Susan. However, these are Miss Charlotte's exact instructions. She believed that only by facing such real and formidable challenges could you prove your true worth and commitment to her legacy. Laura, though visibly shaken, managed to maintain her composure. And if none of us finds the key, she asked, her voice steady but tinged with anxiety. Then you will have failed the first challenge, Mr. Evans replied with a calm finality, and none of you will be able to proceed to the second. Richard's frustration was evident as he paced the room, his agitation barely contained. But Laura, despite the turmoil she felt inside, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him. Richard, we need to approach this with clear minds and careful thought. Mother didn't leave us this challenge out of cruelty. She wanted us to grow, to be tested in ways that matter. This is an opportunity, not just a trial. Her words hung in the air, carrying the weight of the daunting task ahead. The 3 siblings were now faced with a choice that would force them to confront their deepest fears, and possibly each other, in their quest for their mother's inheritance. Susan took a deep breath, her mind grappling with the weight of their mother's request. She had always felt a strong sense of responsibility, but this situation felt like a test far beyond anything she had ever anticipated. "All right," she said, her voice steadying. "We need to fully understand what's at stake before we make any decisions." "And if we choose the wrong boxes?" she asked, her voice betraying the fear she tried to suppress. The lawyer's expression was grim as he shrugged slightly. "Then you'll have to face the consequences." A heavy silence fell over the room, thick with the gravity of the situation. Finally, it was Richard who broke the tension, his voice resolute. "Very well. If these are Mother's wishes, we will do as she says. Whatever the challenges, I will overcome them and claim what is rightfully mine." Susan reluctantly nodded in agreement, while Laura remained quiet, her eyes reflecting a contemplative depth. She sensed that their mother's intentions went far beyond mere tests of bravery or cunning. Mr. Evans rose from his chair, adjusting his glasses as he regarded the three siblings with a somber expression. "It's important you understand the seriousness of these challenges." Miss Charlotte did not arrive at this decision lightly. Laura, calm but curious, finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Mr. Evans, you mentioned the boxes are in a dark room. How will we know which one to choose?" The lawyer nodded, acknowledging the thoughtful question. "Each of you will be given a flashlight. The boxes will be arranged randomly, and you will need to rely on your instincts and judgment to make your choice." Richard, clearly impatient, sighed heavily. "Let's just get this over with. How long do we have to decide?" "You have until the end of this week," Mr. Evans replied, his tone firm but understanding. "Take the time you need. I'll be here to guide you through the process, but the final decision is yours alone." Susan glanced at her siblings, a mixture of concern and determination in her eyes. "We need to prepare carefully. This isn't something we can afford to take lightly." Laura nodded in agreement, her thoughts already racing with possible strategies for the first challenge. "I'm with Susan. We should weigh all our options before making any moves." Mr. Evans watched them closely, his gaze filled with both respect and a touch of sadness. "Remember, this isn't just about the inheritance. It's about honoring your mother's legacy in a way that goes beyond material wealth." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with an unspoken understanding that their lives were about to be tested in ways they had never imagined. This was no ordinary inheritance. Miss Charlotte's final wishes were designed to push them to their emotional and physical limits, to challenge their values, their courage, and their ability to stand together or fall apart. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Mr. Evans looked at the three siblings with a blend of respect and compassion. "You have time to reflect on this," he said quietly. "I'll be here to answer any questions you might have and to guide you through the next steps, but the choices and their consequences will ultimately be yours." With that, the three siblings were left to contemplate the journey ahead, knowing that the path to their inheritance would be anything but straightforward, and that their mother's final gift was a test, not just of their resolve, but of their character. The three siblings exchanged tense glances, each lost in their thoughts, grappling with the magnitude of what lay ahead. Slowly, they nodded in unison, their voices steady as they spoke the words that sealed their fate. "We accept." Richard, always the one to take charge, declared with a confident air, "Tomorrow morning, we'll face the first challenge." But as the weight of their decision settled, Susan and Richard retreated to a secluded corner of the mansion, far from the watchful eyes of Mr. Evans and Laura. The shadows of the dimly lit room seemed to reflect the darkness of their intentions. Richard leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't let Laura get the inheritance," he hissed. "You know what she'd do. She'd give it all away to charity without a second thought." Susan's eyes narrowed, a glint of determination flickering in them. "You're right. Richard, that naive girl has no clue how to manage Mother's fortune. It would be wasted in her hands." Richard's expression hardened, his mind already calculating exactly. "We need to ensure the challenges work in our favor. We can't afford to let her win." Susan glanced around, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What's your plan? How can we make sure she fails?" A sly smile crept across Richard's face, his eyes gleaming with cold resolve. "Laura's weakness is her reliance on instinct. She trusts it too much. We can use that against her. We'll influence her to pick the wrong box in the first challenge." Susan's brow furrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. "This is dangerous. Richard, what if it backfires? What if she realizes what we're doing?" Richard's gaze was steely, his tone unwavering. "We can't afford to hesitate. If we don't take action, Laura could end up with everything, leaving us with nothing. We have to act now, while we still can." As the siblings plotted in the shadows, Laura stood at a distance, her gaze fixed on them. She couldn't hear their words, but the way they huddled together, the furtive glances, they told her all she needed to know. A sense of betrayal welled up inside her, mingling with a growing determination to face whatever lay ahead, no matter the odds. Just then, Mr. Evans approached, his expression filled with quiet concern. "Laura, are you all right? You seem troubled." Laura forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed the turmoil within. "I'm fine, Mr. Evans, just trying to make sense of everything." The lawyer studied her carefully, his gaze softening with understanding. "Remember, Laura, these challenges are more than just a test of skill. They're a reflection of your character. Stay true to who you are, and don't let outside pressures sway you." His words offered a glimmer of comfort, and Laura nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I appreciate your support, but my siblings, they won't stop until they've defeated me." Mr. Evans' expression grew serious, a protective resolve in his eyes. "I'll be watching them closely. Laura, I'll do everything in my power to ensure the challenges remain fair. Trust in yourself, and don't lose sight of what truly matters." With that, Laura felt a renewed strength within her. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but she knew that no matter what schemes her siblings concocted, she would face the challenges with courage and integrity. The battle for her mother's legacy had just begun, and it was not only wealth at stake, but the very essence of who they were as a family. As Mr. Evans walked away, a fierce determination welled up within Laura. She realized that in the challenges ahead, she could trust no one but herself. Her siblings, Richard and Susan, were not merely competing for their mother's fortune. They were plotting betrayal, cloaking their ambition in a false facade of loyalty. The inheritance was no longer just about completing the tasks Miss Charlotte had devised. It was about navigating the treacherous waters of sibling rivalry and deceit. The next morning, the three siblings reconvened at the mansion, their faces set with resolve as they prepared to face the first challenge. The room they entered was cloaked in darkness, save for the dim light that illuminated the three identical boxes arranged in the center. Mr. Evans awaited them, his expression grave. "Are you ready?" he asked, his eyes scanning each of them with a measured intensity. Richard and Susan exchanged a brief but telling look, their confidence bolstered by the dark scheme they had concocted. Laura, unaware of their treachery, simply nodded, her calm exterior concealing the quiet storm within. "Very well." Then Mr. Evans said, "Please follow me." He led them down a long, narrow corridor to a heavy wooden door. Beyond it lay a small room shrouded in darkness, with the three boxes standing ominously in the center. "Remember," the lawyer cautioned, "one of these boxes contains the key to the next challenge. The other two, well, you already know." A chill ran through the room as Mr. Evans stepped back, closing the door behind him with a resounding click that echoed ominously in the confined space. Without missing a beat, Richard and Susan moved to execute their plan. "Let us go first," Richard suggested, his voice dripping with feigned consideration. "We're older. After all, it's our responsibility." Before Laura could protest, Susan was already inching toward one of the boxes, her hand discreetly passing a folded bill to the attendant stationed in the room. The attendant, in turn, gave a subtle nod toward the box containing the key. With a satisfied grin, Susan opened the box and produced a small silver key. "I've got it," she announced triumphantly, holding the key aloft. Richard turned to Laura with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you try next, little sister?" he urged, directing her toward the box he wanted her to choose. Trusting her brother, Laura approached the box he indicated. She hesitated for a moment, her instincts prickling at the back of her mind, but before she could decide, the door to the room suddenly burst open with a thunderous crash. "Stop everything!" a commanding voice bellowed. It was James, her late mother's closest friend, flanked by Mr. Evans, who looked both shocked and determined. Richard and Susan froze, their faces draining of color as James stepped forward, holding up a small device. "I have proof that you two have been cheating," he declared, his voice cold with righteous anger. From the device, the unmistakable voices of Richard and Susan filled the room, replaying their whispered conversation. Their plotting laid bare. Laura's eyes widened in disbelief as she listened, her heart sinking as the betrayal unfolded before her. Richard and Susan stood in stunned silence, their shock mingled with fear as the weight of their actions came crashing down on them. The room that had been filled with their scheming now echoed with the consequences of their treachery, exposed for all to see. Mr. Evans stepped forward, his voice firm. "Miss Charlotte foresaw this possibility," he said, his gaze sharp as it settled on the guilty pair. "She knew that integrity would be the ultimate test. By trying to cheat, you have forfeited your right to the inheritance." Laura, still reeling from the revelation, met Mr. Evans' gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. The challenges not only tested their skills but had revealed the true nature of each sibling. And now, as the dust settled, it was clear that the legacy Miss Charlotte had left behind was far more than just material wealth. It was a lesson in character, loyalty, and the importance of remaining true to oneself. The silence that followed was heavy with the unspoken understanding that the inheritance had already been decided not by wealth or strategy, but by the choices each sibling had made. "Your mother foresaw that you too might try to cheat," James said, his voice laced with disappointment as he shook his head. "She specifically asked me to install hidden cameras and monitor everything. The true purpose of these challenges was to test your honesty and morality." Richard and Susan stood speechless, their faces flushed with shame as the weight of their betrayal bore down on them. Mr. Evans, who had always prided himself on professionalism, could no longer hide his disdain as he glared at them. "It seems the inheritance will not be yours after all," he stated coldly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Laura, still in shock, glanced at her siblings, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The pain of their betrayal cut deep, but what hurt even more was the realization that her mother had been right all along. Miss Charlotte had known her children's true nature, and now that truth was laid bare. James approached Laura with a gentle expression, his voice filled with compassion. "Laura, I'm truly sorry you had to go through this. Your mother trusted you, believing you would uphold her values." Laura nodded slowly, still struggling to process the overwhelming emotions swirling within her. "Thank you, James. At least now I know where we all stand." Mr. Evans cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the room. "Laura," he began, his tone softer now, "you are the only one who demonstrated integrity throughout this ordeal. By your mother's wishes, the entirety of her fortune will be passed to you." Laura blinked in disbelief, her mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of what she had just heard. "But what about my siblings?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Evans shook his head firmly. "They have forfeited their inheritance by attempting to manipulate the challenges. The specific clauses of Miss Charlotte's will are clear. Any act of deceit results in immediate disqualification." Richard and Susan remained silent, the reality of their greed and dishonesty settling heavily upon them. They knew there were no arguments left to make, no excuses that could undo the damage they had done. Laura felt a bittersweet mix of relief and sadness. She had inherited her mother's fortune, but the cost was too high to feel any joy. The betrayal of her siblings left a wound that no amount of wealth could heal. As Richard and Susan faced the undeniable proof of their deceit, the consequences of their actions became painfully clear. Mr. Evans approached them, his expression a mask of disappointment. "You two should be ashamed of yourselves," the lawyer scolded, his voice cold and stern. "Your mother trusted you to act with honor and integrity, but instead you conspired to cheat from the very beginning." Richard, desperate to salvage what little dignity he had left, tried to justify their actions, but his voice faltered. "We only wanted to make sure the inheritance went to the right person," he muttered weakly. "Enough," Susan cut in, turning to James with pleading eyes. "Please. There must be some mistake. We didn't mean to betray Laura intentionally." James sighed heavily, his expression a mix of pity and disgust. "The evidence speaks for itself. Susan, you and Richard were caught red-handed. Miss Charlotte was very clear about the purpose of these challenges, and she left no room for manipulation." Mr. Evans consulted the documents in his briefcase before continuing, his voice resolute. "According to the terms of Miss Charlotte's will, any attempt to influence the outcome of these challenges results in automatic disqualification from the inheritance. You have lost all rights to any part of it." Richard clenched his fists in frustration, his anger boiling over. "This isn't fair. Laura doesn't deserve more than we do." James, his tone now stern, intervened. "Laura demonstrated the values your mother cherished most: honesty, integrity, and respect for others. She faced these challenges without deceit, which is why she deserves the inheritance." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence filled with finality. The siblings' lives had been irrevocably altered, not by the challenges themselves, but by the choices they had made. Laura had proven her worth, not through cunning or manipulation, but by staying true to her mother's values, a legacy far more valuable than any fortune. While the discussion continued in the dimly lit room, Laura remained on the sidelines, her emotions swirling between sadness and relief. The depth of her siblings' greed left her disheartened, but she also felt a deep sense of gratitude for being recognized for her integrity. This moment was bittersweet, a vindication of her character, but at the cost of family ties she once held dear. Finally, Mr. Evans approached her, a gentle smile softening his usually stern expression. "Laura, according to your mother's wishes, you are indeed the sole beneficiary of the inheritance." Laura nodded quietly, acknowledging the lawyer's words as she absorbed this reality. A small sigh of surprise escaped her. She had never sought this fortune, never imagined herself in this position. The wealth now in her hands felt like a burden rather than a blessing. Richard and Susan, on the other hand, were struck by a new wave of shock, their faces twisted with desperation as Richard, unable to contain himself, blurted out, "But this can't be right. Laura didn't even want the inheritance." Susan, tears streaming down her cheeks, joined in, her voice pleading, "Please reconsider. Laura will do anything for another chance." Laura looked at her siblings, her heart heavy with sorrow. She had every reason to let them face the consequences of their actions, but her innate kindness and compassion held her back. She knew she couldn't simply walk away without offering them a path to redemption. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "I accept the inheritance," she began, raising a hand to silence Richard and Susan's protests, "but with one condition." Mr. Evans and James exchanged surprised glances, intrigued by Laura's unexpected turn. "And what condition is that?" Mr. Evans asked, his voice cautious. Laura offered a faint smile, her eyes reflecting both empathy and resolve. "That my siblings have a chance to redeem themselves, to show that they can act with honesty and integrity from now on." Richard and Susan, still reeling from the dramatic turn of events, stared at her in disbelief. James, his arms crossed, regarded Laura's words with deep consideration. "How do you propose they do that?" he asked, curious but also respectful of her intentions. Laura took a moment to gather her thoughts, then turned to Mr. Evans, her voice thoughtful yet resolute. "They will have 1 year," she explained, "during which they will be closely monitored by you and James. If, at the end of that period, they demonstrate genuine change in their behavior and attitudes, then we can revisit the inheritance decision." Richard's immediate response was one of frustration. "A year? That's too long." But Mr. Evans quickly silenced him with a raised hand. "This is a generous offer from Laura," the lawyer said, his tone firm. "You should accept it with humility if you truly want to make amends." Susan, wiping away her tears, looked directly into Laura's eyes, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "We accept," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. "We will prove that we deserve another chance." Laura felt a wave of relief, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning of a long and challenging journey. The path ahead would not be easy for any of them, but it was a path that held the possibility of healing, redemption, and perhaps, in time, the restoration of the family bonds that had been so badly strained. As they left the room, Laura knew that her mother's final test had not just been about wealth, but about character, forgiveness, and the hope that even the most fractured relationships could be mended with time, effort, and a sincere desire to change. Richard reluctantly agreed, realizing he had no other choice. "Very well," he muttered, his voice barely concealing his frustration. Laura offered a small smile, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Then it settled. Mr. Evans nodded in approval, his stern expression softening just slightly. "I'm satisfied with this resolution. James and I will ensure that this probation period is fair and rigorous." James, who had observed the entire ordeal with a mixture of concern and hope, placed a supportive hand on Laura's shoulder. "You've shown true greatness today. Laura, your mother would be proud." As the siblings walked away, each lost in their thoughts, Laura knew that the coming year would be crucial despite everything. She sincerely hoped that Richard and Susan could find their way to redemption. Deep down, she still wanted to believe in the family they had once dreamed of being together. In the days that followed, Laura took the reins of the vast businesses and fortunes her mother had left behind. The responsibilities were immense, but she approached them with the same integrity and dedication that had guided her through the challenges. As she settled into her new role, she couldn't help but reflect on the opportunity she had given her siblings a chance to rebuild trust and mend the fractured bonds between them. One afternoon, while Laura was reviewing documents in her office, a hesitant knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called. Looking up from her work, the door opened slowly, and Richard stepped inside, his eyes downcast, his usual confidence replaced by a palpable sense of remorse. "Richard," Laura greeted him, her tone a mixture of compassion and caution. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, a glimpse of the brother she had once known before greed and ambition had driven them apart. Richard hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. "Laura, I wanted to apologize again for what I did during the challenges. I was blinded by greed, and I lost sight of what truly matters." Laura listened carefully, her expression thoughtful, as she considered his words. "What happened hurt all of us, Richard," she replied gently, "but I also believe that people can change if they're genuinely willing to. Redemption is possible, but it requires more than just words." Richard nodded, visibly relieved by her response. Though his anxiety was still evident. "I know my apology may seem empty after everything, but I'm committed to making things right. I want to earn your trust back and show that I can be a positive part of our mother's legacy." There was a sincerity in Richard's voice that touched Laura. She had always seen him as a fierce competitor, someone who prioritized success over principles, but in that moment, she glimpsed a different side of him, one that was capable of growth and change. After a brief pause, Laura spoke, her voice warm but firm. "Richard, I appreciate your honesty. The path to redemption won't be easy, but I'm willing to give you that chance. This isn't just about the inheritance or the family business. It's about rebuilding the trust that was broken. If you're truly committed, then I'll be here to support you." Richard looked up, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Laura. I won't let you down." As he left the office, Laura felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but it was also filled with the possibility of healing and reconciliation. For the first time in a long while, Laura believed that their family, though scarred by the past, could still find a way forward together. "I believe in second chances," Laura said with a calm yet resolute tone, "but I won't make it easy for you if you truly want to be part of this legacy. You'll need to prove your sincerity through concrete actions. Our business and charity projects demand integrity and commitment." Richard nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "I understand. I don't expect this to be easy, but I'm willing to work hard to regain everyone's trust." Laura offered a small, encouraging smile. "Start small, prove yourself every day, and if you ever need guidance or help, know that I'm here to support you." For a moment, Laura studied Richard with a penetrating gaze, assessing his sincerity. She had encountered numerous challenges since inheriting her mother's business and fortune, and Richard's presence at this pivotal moment could be a turning point for both him and the family. "I accept your apology," Laura said firmly, "but actions speak louder than words. You need to prove that you've changed." Richard nodded earnestly, his expression filled with genuine determination. "I know, and that's exactly why I'm here. I'd like to join you in working on one of your projects." Laura raised an eyebrow, honestly surprised. "Are you serious? You've never shown much interest in my charity work." Richard looked down for a moment, his voice softening as he met her gaze with newfound sincerity. "Yes, I'm serious. I realize now that I was wrong to dismiss your work. It's noble, and it makes a real difference in people's lives. Please, let me help." Laura took a moment to evaluate her brother, her mind weighing his words and the emotions behind them. There was something different about Richard this time, something genuine she hadn't seen before. A cautious smile curved her lips, signaling both hope and vigilance. "All right," Laura finally said, making her decision. "I'll give you a chance, but remember, at the first sign of dishonesty, it will be your last." Richard nodded solemnly, his gratitude evident. "I understand. Laura, I promise I won't let you down." With that, Richard left her office, a mix of relief and determination swirling inside him. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it and prove his change. As Richard walked away, Laura reflected on the possibilities and challenges ahead. She had taken on not only the responsibility for the family business, but also the role of guiding her siblings toward a path of righteousness and integrity. It was a heavy burden, but she was determined to uphold her mother's legacy and keep the family united. In the weeks that followed, Richard threw himself into one of Laura's social projects, the construction of a school for underprivileged children. Laura watched closely as he worked with renewed determination, noticing the effort he put into every task. It was clear he was committed to proving himself, and she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. One day, while visiting the construction site, Laura ran into Susan, who approached her with a hesitant expression. "Laura, can I talk to you?" Susan asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Laura nodded, her tone warm but cautious. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Susan twisted her hands anxiously, clearly struggling to find the right words. I wanted to apologize too, and accept your offer of redemption. Watching Richard work so hard, and seeing how dedicated he is inspired me. I want to do the right thing this time." Laura studied Susan's face, seeing a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. Her sister's words carried a sincerity that hadn't been there during the challenges. Taking a deep breath, Laura decided to give Susan the same opportunity she had given Richard. "Susan," Laura began, her voice gentle yet firm, "I appreciate your willingness to change like Richard. You'll need to prove yourself through actions if you're sincere. I'm willing to support you on this journey." Susan's eyes filled with gratitude, her voice trembling slightly as she replied, "Thank you, Laura. I won't let you down." As the two sisters stood together at the construction site, a sense of hope began to bloom in Laura's heart. The path to redemption wouldn't be easy for any of them, but with determination and a commitment to change, there was a chance that their family could heal and grow stronger. The journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but Laura knew they were moving in the right direction, one step at a time. Laura's smile widened as she saw the tears in Susan's eyes. "I'm glad to hear that. "Susan, there will always be a place for you here, if you truly want to redeem yourself." Susan couldn't hold back her emotions any longer and wrapped her arms around Laura in a heartfelt hug. "Thank you for this chance. Laura, I won't let you down again." Laura returned the embrace, her voice soft with tenderness. "I'm here to help rebuild our family. Susan, together, we can make a real difference." As Richard and Susan committed themselves to their paths of redemption, Laura continued to manage the family business with a blend of wisdom and compassion. The school they were building quickly took shape, fueled by the hard work and renewed passion of everyone involved. The three siblings, once divided by greed and mistrust, were now united by a shared goal to honor their mother's legacy by creating something truly meaningful. But the road to redemption was not without its challenges. Richard struggled to break free from his old habits of manipulation and greed, often finding himself tempted to revert to his selfish ways. He knew that changing years of behavior wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to fight those urges. Susan, on the other hand, grappled with self-doubt, constantly questioning whether her sincere actions were enough to make up for her past mistakes. The guilt weighed heavily on her, but she pressed on, driven by the desire to make things right. Laura faced her own set of challenges. Balancing the responsibilities of running the business with the need to guide her siblings was no easy task. She often found herself recalling the lessons of integrity and compassion her mother had instilled in her, striving to be the example her siblings needed. It was a delicate balance, but one she was determined to maintain. In the months that followed, Richard and Susan threw themselves into their work, collaborating with Laura on various social projects. Slowly but surely, the bitterness and greed that had once consumed them began to fade. Instead, a new sense of purpose and fulfillment took root. As they spent time with the children benefiting from the school, they began to see the world through different eyes. Each child's smile served as a powerful reminder of what truly mattered in life. Laura watched their transformation with a deep sense of pride. It was as if, by facing these challenges and rediscovering the value of generosity and honest work, Richard and Susan were also rediscovering their true selves. The conversations that once revolved around financial strategies now centered on how to improve the children's education. The competitiveness that had driven them apart was replaced by genuine collaboration. One sunny afternoon, as Laura strolled through the school's blooming gardens, she spotted Richard and Susan engaged in activities with the children. They were laughing together, their hands covered in paint, as they helped the kids create vibrant murals on the school walls. They handed out school supplies with smiles, their hearts lightened by the joy of giving. The sight filled Laura with warmth and gratitude, a reminder of how far they had all come since that fateful day when their mother's will had been rid. As dusk settled in and the day's volunteer work came to an end, the three siblings gathered in the school's administration room. Sitting around a table, they exchanged looks full of gratitude and mutual understanding. The tension that once defined their relationship had been replaced with a sense of camaraderie and respect. "I can't believe how much things have changed," Susan said, her voice filled with sincerity as she smiled at Laura. "Thank you, Laura, for believing in us and giving us this opportunity." Laura looked at her siblings, her heart swelling with pride and affection. "I always believed you had the strength to change. I'm just glad you both found the courage to prove it." Richard nodded, his expression softened by humility. "We've all grown so much, and it's thanks to you. Laura, you showed us that redemption is possible, even when we didn't believe it ourselves." As they sat together, the three siblings realized that they had not only rebuilt their family, but had also created something far greater than any material inheritance. They had forged a bond grounded in trust, love, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place, one small step at a time. Richard nodded, his usual stern expression now softened by a newfound lightness. "You showed us the way. Laura, I never imagined I could feel so fulfilled, especially by something so different from what I used to chase." Laura smiled warmly, a mix of pride and emotion welling up inside her. "You too. did the hard work I just offered a chance. It's incredible to see how you've embraced it and turned it into something meaningful." The three siblings fell into a comfortable silence, each reflecting on the journey they had taken together. What had once seemed like an insurmountable challenge, the legacy of their mother, with all its weight and expectations, had transformed into a source of strength, unity, and purpose. The shadow that had loomed over them now shone brightly, guiding them toward a future they were proud to build. "I know we can't change the past," Richard said quietly, breaking the silence, "but we can shape our future. Let's keep making a difference here. Together, I promise we'll never lose sight of what matters." Susan nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "And we'll never stray from the path of integrity. This school is just the beginning of what we can achieve when we work together." Laura felt a lump rise in her throat. Deeply touched by her siblings' words, her heart swelled with pride as she thought of their late mother. "Mother would be so proud of you both," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You truly are her legacy, and together, we're honoring her in the best possible way." The siblings exchanged looks of mutual respect and understanding, knowing that the bonds they had rebuilt were stronger than ever. They had not only redeemed themselves, but had also created a lasting impact that would carry their mother's values forward, touching the lives of countless others. As they left the school that evening, the sun setting behind them, they walked away not just as siblings, but as partners in a shared mission to make the world a better place, one step at a time. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of redemption, family, and the power of second chances. We've seen how Richard, Susan, and Laura transformed their lives by embracing integrity, compassion, and a commitment to making a positive difference in the world. Now, we want to hear from you. What have you learned from their story? Is there a lesson or value that you'll bring into your own life? Please share one thing you've learned and we'll practice in the comments below this video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.